Welcome to the RotoWire Prospect Podcast. I'm your host, James Anderson, and I've got a great guest tonight. I've got Melissa Lockard from The Athletic joining me. Melissa's a longtime guest on the show. We always talk A's, but Melissa, it's got to be weird watching this team, have all these exciting young players and be a team that I think most fans would love to root for, but it's on the heels of a messy exit. So what is it like sort of as a longtime A's follower to sort of watch this team, but have them not be playing in Oakland?
Yeah, it's been very weird. I think, on the one hand, it's been fun to see some of the guys that I covered for a very long time finally get a chance to make their debuts, even like Logan Davidson, who had such a rough start to his pro career, being a 2019 first-round pick and then shoved up to AA right after the pandemic. And, so there's been some real feel-good stories, Denzel Clarke coming up, Max Muncy. But at the same time, it's hard not to sort of look at what could have been when you think of the fact that, you look at that home record at Sutter Health Park and how bad it is and how much of an advantage they'd had for so many years playing at the Coliseum. And they've really basically threw that away, as from a competitive standpoint for nothing. So that part's hard. And they do just feel very removed. I mean, it's not like it's only an hour and a half away, but that's can be a million miles away in terms of your kind of connection to it. So it's definitely been difficult. I haven't nearly spent as much time focusing on it as I have in past years. I can't hear you. Sorry.
We definitely don't root for owners here. But yeah, I mean, it's like the players, I love this team. I want to talk about them, but I just hate that it's kind of happening the way it's happening. They've just got so many exciting young players, especially on the position player side, and they're all about the same age. So it's just a really fun young core. And I kind of want to dive into it sort of. I want to talk through some of the players, and then at the end, we'll try to predict what we think the A's lineup on opening day 2026 is going to look like. And I think we got to start with Jacob Wilson at shortstop. And I'll just come clean, and I'll admit that I thought that the 8 home runs and 5 steals he had on June 9th was basically what he was going to finish the season with from a home runs and steals standpoint. And obviously the hit tool is amazing. The ability to make contact's amazing. But then it's coming with a bit more power and a bit more speed than at least I was anticipating. And so obviously this is a fantasy show, a dynasty specific show, in fact. And so I'm wondering, if you have Jacob Wilson in a dynasty league, are you looking at this as potentially the high point of his value because of this, more power than expected, more, a little bit more speed maybe than expected? Or do you think we're just going to come to expect 15 to 20 homers, 10 to 15 steals every year from Wilson throughout his 20s?
Yeah, it's tough. I think he's actually one of the most interesting and perhaps puzzling players in all of baseball. I think, we've come so accustomed to looking at StatCast, to looking at all the different measurables that you can look at and kind of making our assessments based on that. And obviously nothing that he does from a StatCast perspective is going to make anyone believe that he's going to be like a superstar player. But at the same time, the further you get into this season, legitimately hitting 360, you get over, double-digit home runs, it's hard to ignore that it's working. And I think when I look at him just from a kind of scouting perspective, he looks like a guy who, it sort of reminds me of like Mark Ellis, where he was sort of an other way hitter, kind of looking for base hits, but every once in a while a pitch would come inside and he'd just be able to drop the hands and turn on it. And I think Wilson seems like he's had the power to be able to do that when he wants to. And I think the key is that he's not always up there doing that. So, the question is, do pitchers sort of make an adjustment and never put the ball in to where the point that he's going to drop his hands and just, hit a home run that way, or whether this will continue. I think you also have to look at the fact that if they are going to play in Sacramento for a couple more years and then move on to Las Vegas, he's going to have a pretty favorable home ballpark for hitting home runs for quite some time. I don't think power, I would never guess power would be his biggest skill, but I do think it's certainly possible to see that 10 to 15 home run kind of like level for him for most years. The speed, I think, that part of it, I'm a little skeptical, only because hamstrings have been an issue for him now a couple of times already. He was never a plus runner to begin with, and you start to wonder if they pull back from even having him attempt to make those steals if a hamstring injury becomes a long-term thing. So I'd keep an eye on that. I mean, I think it's not hard in today's game to get to 10 steals if a team's willing to let you run, no matter who you are. I mean, look at Cal Raleigh's going to probably get to like 15, which is kind of unbelievable. But I don't think speed either I think it's going to really always be average and base hits. And then, but I do think it's possible to see that 10 to 15 home run range from him moving forward. He really hadn't weightlifted at all in college, and has just sort of started doing that as a pro. So, there may be more there than we ever saw before this.
Yeah, he's just such a good example of like why baseball's such a cool sport. Like you kind of know exactly sort of what you need to know to evaluate like a hitter, and then a guy like Jacob Wilson comes along, and it's just very few guys have his strengths and weaknesses, and his strengths are so pushing 80 grade level strengths, right? So just such a fun player, and definitely someone I was wrong about. Wish I had him on some fantasy teams, but props to everyone out there that was kind of able to look past the StatCast stuff and sort of fade the noise on Jacob Wilson, because he is, like you said, one of the more exciting young players in the game. And that brings us to this triumvirate of really exciting sluggers: Nick Kurtz, Tyler Soderstrom, Brent Rooker. Obviously, Rooker is like 6 years older than Kurtz and Soderstrom, but from a MLB regular, like he's only in his third and a half year as an MLB regular, so he's kind of younger as a big leaguer than his actual age. Do you think so? Like, if we assume that they've got Kurtz, they've got Soderstrom, they've got Rooker, do you think the team will be comfortable with Soderstrom playing mostly in the outfield long term to accommodate Kurtz and Rooker at first base and DH, or do you see a scenario where they trade one of those three before opening day of next year?
It's tough. I have to say the roster construction is kind of a mess right now. I think altogether they don't really have a lot of pieces that fit that well, unfortunately. And I think this is one of the main spots where it really collides in with each other. I think you look at, again, like also JJ Bleday, like what do you do with someone like him who really shouldn't play center field? Right. But you've got nowhere else to put them in the corners. Tyler has not looked great in left field. To fairness to him, he'd never played it, and they have him running out there doing it in the major leagues. That's like big props for being willing to do that. I thought he'd actually make quite a lot of strides as a first baseman, and frankly had gotten better at catcher, despite the fact that he doesn't really love doing it. So I'm not really sure why they've abandoned the idea of having him maybe catch a couple of days a week, play first base a couple of days a week, and maybe, DH a couple of days a week and pull it together that way. That seems to me like it would be more conducive to success defensively than what they're doing right now, especially now that Langoliers is out for a while. It seems like it'd be a good time to try to get him back behind the plate. But they don't seem to want to do that for whatever reason. So I don't know how those three can coexist that well on a roster together long term. But I also don't know how you trade any of them, because you got two cheap sluggers who, are offensively really, beneficial to you in Kurtz and Soderstrom. And you're probably not going to get equal value for those guys if you trade them. And then you have Rooker, who you've just invested all this money in. And I think they're in a situation where they can't trade guys who are making money because they need to prove that they can spend it. And I think, as we saw today in the player poll, they're not going to be drawing a lot of free agents. So, the guys like that, even Severino, who you think maybe would be a trade candidate, I don't know that they could trade him, because they need people who make money to be on the team in order to keep that payroll. So I'm not sure how they figure it out. I mean, Rooker had an elbow thing that he had surgery for in the offseason. He has played a little bit more left field again. I think ideally, given that he is actually an outfielder, maybe he eventually gets to be able to be to the point where the elbow is good enough for him to play left field more. But I don't know that asking a catcher / first baseman who sometimes played third base in high school to go out to left field and Soderstrom is the answer I'd be looking for. And Kurtz is really limited just to first base. So it's a tough question, I think.
So is Soderstrom a notably worse outfield defender than Rooker, do you think? Like a full strength Rooker?
I mean, yeah, it's hard to know because I don't know that we've seen a full strength Brent Rooker in terms of his defensive abilities, because I think that elbow's been an issue for a while. But he certainly has way more experience at it.
Sure.
And, I think the early returns defensively for the entire team have been terrible, save for Denzel, Clarke, and, Jacob Wilson's been average. But, getting Zack Gelof back at some point, I think will help the infield defense quite a bit. Obviously, Nick Kurtz, I think, is a better first baseman than Soderstrom was once he's healthy enough to be playing there every day. But ultimately, there's just a lot of guys that are not playing positions they should be playing right now. And I think that one particular triumvirate right there is a good example of where it's been a problem.
Yeah, this is kind of what led me down the outline for today's show. Is I was just kind of trying to figure out, which pieces definitely fit sort of where they're at right now. And I want to talk about Kurtz because, obviously a elite prospect. And it was a real shame at the time of his injury because, I know he's back from the IL, but he had his best, 4-game stretch or 3-game stretch, 5-game stretch of the year right before that injury. Really seemed like he was kind of dialed in there at the plate. What have been your early impressions from him? You could take it offense, defense, just kind of the way about him. Like, I don't know. What do you think about Nick Kurtz?
Yeah, I think he's exactly who they expected him to be as a draft pick, which is saying a lot given where he was drafted and the kind of scouting report that was on him. I think, he's got incredible plate discipline. There's some swing and miss there, but you expect that with a slugger. The power's there. And, I think he is a good defensive first baseman. I think the real question is, this is the second time he's had a lower body injury since he's turned pro, which, again, like with Jacob Wilson, you do have to be a little bit concerned given that these are young players that you're, losing time to kind of muscle injuries in the lower half this early on. But it sort of, in getting back to the roster construction a little bit, I wonder if perhaps they thought, well, we're just going to outslug how bad the defense and the pitching could get in this sort of scenario where you're playing in a bandbox as opposed to the Coliseum as your home field. And I just like they've got good hitters, but they don't have enough good hitters, I think, to make that kind of thing work. Like you look back to 2001 or 2000 when the A's were like kind of that young Jason Giambi type team, and they were sort of able to out-hit their defensive issues. But this team, I think, isn't quite at that point yet, which is why like Denzel Clarke coming up, I think really does make a huge difference despite the fact that the hitting hasn't been there yet. And I do think, Kurtz being a regular first baseman, could resettle things. And again, I think that missing Gelof at second base has been a tough deal for them most of the year.
Yeah, the lower body stuff with Kurtz was really the only knock I ever heard on him coming out of the draft, even going back to Wake Forest, was just he was a guy that was obviously very big because he gets the Jim Tomei body comps. And then you have the track record of the lower body injuries. But no one really had anything bad to say about him from a skill or talent standpoint. It was just kind of like, well, he's had a hard time, playing full seasons, and he's got this big frame. So is that something that catches up to him? But it's kind of just like, you nail the Jacob Wilson pick, and then you nail the Nick Kurtz pick, and then you nail the Brent Rooker kind of post-hype development story, and then you kind of find yourself like in this position with Tyler Soderstrom, who you got way before you got those guys, and he develops into the kind of the best hitting version of himself. It's kind of like I'm trying to think how I would have played it differently if I were them. Like maybe you take like a Connor Griffin instead of Nick Kurtz in the draft, knowing that you already have a Soderstrom and a Rooker. But you hit on the Kurtz pick, I think, so it's tough to fault him for that pick. So and you probably weren't going to get that much for Rooker if you traded him pre-extension, just given his position and kind of. So I don't know exactly what the right way to have played that would have been, but Very interesting to sort of see what they do, because like it does seem like they just have 3 guys for 2 spots.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were playing fantasy manager among all teams and you could make a deal, I wonder if the A's and the Cardinals could come together and swap first round picks from last year, because I see like Weatherholt could be their third baseman and Kurtz could fit in right pretty easily in St. Louis at first base. There were actually, for a draft that didn't look all that strong on draft day, like I think the 2024 class is looking pretty strong right now. And so there are some guys that I think maybe you look at and you think, oh, that they could have worked too. But I think absolutely you're not disappointed at all in the pick that you made with Kurtz. It's just the fit at this point on the roster is a little bit weird. But he also got there faster than maybe people anticipated too, which creates a wrinkle. So
yeah, I mean he showed up to the Arizona Fall League and just looked like he just didn't belong at all, just from a poise and talent standpoint. It was just so easy for him. And like that 2024 draft, I think we'll be able to look back on that like 5-10 years from now. There's just so much talent in that class. It's just going to be fascinating to sort of see where it goes. And notable that the number 1 overall pick is not a guy that's like kind of at the top, 3, 4, 5 of the discussion from that class. So.
Right. Yeah, no, it is interesting. And I think further down too, like even the A's draft, you look at Gage Jump and then you look at Tommy White and those guys are off to really great starts as well. And so, the third base question might be answered by Tommy White for the A's in the year, like that's sort of an interesting element to it as well. So, but guys are moving so much faster now, you never draft for need. And yet I wonder if at some point MLB teams do start to have to look at like, do I have too many shortstops? Do I have too many? I mean, you can never have too many shortstops, but do I have too many first basemen? Because if you can't absolutely have too many first basemen.
Yeah, you can have too many designated hitters in first base.
Yeah, exactly. So, so the short answer, I'm not sure how they're going to resolve it. I would guess of the 3, Soderstrom is the most likely to be moved, but I don't know that you can get great value for him. So I think that they'd be better served trying to figure out a way to make him fit defensively for him.
Well, I would, if I were a team out there that could trade for Tyler Soderstrom and maybe get him for a price that I think you might like expect them to get for him, I would love to do that. I think Soderstrom's just great, but
yeah, and he's, from day one too, like they brought him into that pandemic camp and he was hitting the ball harder than anyone who had been there as a pro all, 7 years. He's 18 and doing that. So I think, he was a little bit of a post type guy in some ways himself, but people forget how well regarded he was before all that.
Well, and he's 23,
right.
It's like he's a post type guy, but he's still 23.
We move so fast on guys now. It's amazing.
Okay, let's head to a quick message from our sponsors. When we come back, I'll talk to Melissa about Denzel Clarke and if the bat has a chance of getting a little bit closer to that amazing glove. All right, we're back with Melissa Lockard of The Athletic. And, we've got Lawrence Butler, who's obviously going to be locked into one of these outfield spots come opening day 2026. Love Lawrence Butler. But I want to start with Denzel Clarke among the outfielders, who you mentioned a couple times already. And I sent you this outline before he made even his best catch of the season. Like he'd already made 2 ridiculous catches before that catch, and then he makes what might go down as the best catch of the entire season by anyone. So the defense, we know why he's up. Obviously, he was on the 40-man roster too, but you talked about how bad the team defense was. Just having a guy like that out in center field, I'm sure the pitchers love it. But what kind of hitter do you think he's going to be? Because I'll be honest, I kind of got sucked in a little bit by what he did in the AFL, and then the ground ball rate became a huge problem again right away this year. He still gets the call because of the defense, because he was on the 40-man. But have you heard anything from like the team or seen anything in terms of like him working on kind of trying to figure out how to lift the ball a bit more, or what's your kind of expectations for Denzel Clarke, the hitter? And then of course, if you want to wax about his defense, you can as well.
Yeah. I mean, he's an interesting guy because I think there's never been a good consensus as to who he should be as a hitter. And I think at some point they and him are going to have to decide, he came in as a power hitter, right? Like he came in as a big swing and miss, but can hit the ball a ton. guy, but the strikeouts were a problem. And I think they've been working on trying to get him to fix that. But in getting him to fix that, he's become kind of this like contact hitter. And I sort of made the comment that he's wearing number 1 as if he's a little guy, and he is sort of playing like a little guy in some ways. And I don't know that he needs to, right? Like I sort of look at it more like, if he hit 230 with 25 homers, even if he's getting on base at a 280 clip with that defense, he'd be one of the more valuable guys on the team regardless, right? Like, and I think he's got the talent for that, the power. I mean, you saw the home run he hit in Toronto. That was like an enormous home run in that park. And that was easy. Like, he wasn't swinging out of his shoes or anything. He has that power. He's got the speed, you know, like he's a 20 stolen base guy if he's getting on base enough to do that. So he's never going to be a perfect player. And I think in trying to maybe make him perfect, they perhaps kind of set him back a little bit. But I'd love to see him kind of go back to who he was in Midland like a year and a half ago, where, yeah, the strikeouts were there, but he does have a good idea of the strike zone. So like, it's more a matter of just letting him try to swing for power on those pitches that he's going after, rather than trying to like make contact on them. And if you miss some of them, you miss some of them, and it is what it is. But, you know, I do think there is a place in this game for somebody who can bring that much value to center field and, you know, have enough power that at the bottom of a lineup could surprise the team and turn that lineup over again, also with the speed if you get on there. So I like him a lot. I mean, he's absolutely one of my most favorite players to watch. And he's really hard worker. He's always taking in, you know, a lot of information from coaches and trying to make changes and stuff. But yeah, I mean, if you could go back to who he was as a hitter about a year and a half ago, I think you'd get an even better version of him. But even at this, like what he's hitting now, he's still like, I saw something where he has something like 8 outs above average in 76 plays or something, and like 4th in the league, and he's only been up for like 3 weeks, you know? So, I mean, that's just to go from what they were doing in center field to that is like night and day. So, you know, I feel like he has a place on the team regardless.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of guys who've played really, really good center field, and there've been, you know, holes in their offense, but they have a 10, 12, 15-year career just because they're providing something on offense, and then it's their glove that's making them like a 4-win player. And he's, you know, to have, like you said, like he's been worth half a win over replacement in 17 games with a 200 average, a 228 OBP, and a 54% strikeout rate. So
yeah, exactly. And then the other thing too is he's been a slow starter hitting wise at every level he's ever played at too. And he never really got, I mean, this was his first chance at AAA. So like, you know, I do think there isn't a lot to be read into even his AAA numbers this year yet, because I don't know that he'd gotten his feet planted there. So if I were them, I'd give him a long run. This season's probably over in terms of competitiveness anyway. I would give him a long run at the big leagues, get him comfortable, and see if you can get him over that hump that he always seems to need to get over at each level.
Did you have any thoughts on like Lawrence Butler or JJ Bleday at all? I was going to ask you about some of their outfield prospects, but I mean, Lawrence Butler, like I said, he's awesome in my opinion. And Bleday, it seems like he's kind of maybe going to get squeezed from the roster. I don't know. Like, do you have any thoughts on those?
I mean, I think, you know, I think Bleday's only back up because of injuries. So, you know, there were things that they thought he needed to work on. The defense obviously was a real problem in center field this year, whereas last year it was only sort of a problem. And that may have been because the corner defenses have gotten worse and he had to cover more ground. But whatever it was, you know, that sort of collapsed on him at the same time that he wasn't getting on base as much as he had been getting on base the year before. But, you know, obviously he has the foundation to be a solid offensive player. I think on a team that is competing, like you could see him being like a really, really strong 4th outfielder, or like your kind of most regular left fielder who, you know, sits maybe against all lefties and that sort of thing. But Butler, though, yeah, I mean, I think he's their leadoff hitter for a long time. You know, he sees a lot of pitches. He makes things happen with his legs. He's got power. He can, hit the ball to all fields. I think he's a guy that you build around for sure. And, and he got off to a slow start. And I think you worry about somebody like who signs a big contract like that it's going to collapse on him. And it didn't, right? Like, I think that's actually really a testament to his mental strength that he was able to do that, pull himself back out and be right back to where he was before. So, I don't have a lot of worries about Lawrence Butler.
No, not at all. And even during that slow start, he was making really good swing decisions. He was just, the stats weren't quite there, but was never worried about him. Now, Colby Thomas, Henry Bolte, Colby Thomas basically doing sort of exactly what you would have thought he would do and going to AAA. He's a very productive offensive player. He's putting up big time numbers again at AAA. Henry Bolte, though, he's surprised me a little bit with how he's trimmed the strikeouts. Of course, he's repeating AA, but do you have a sense of whether the A's are high on those guys potentially contributing early next year, maybe later this summer for Thomas, or is it just kind of too crowded right now for that to be realistic?
Yeah, I mean, I could see if they do end up making a couple of moves with like Blade and I don't. Seth Brown keeps coming back up and going back down, but he's around there too. But I could see Thomas definitely getting some time at the end of the year. Like, they tend to kind of call guys up in July right after the All-Star break, and I could see him being a guy that's sort of circled for that. I think Bolte's probably got another year still, like just given that he's so young and everything, but he's been really impressive. I mean, there were so many questions about him and, his swing decisions and his contact rate and everything coming out of the draft, just because like he was a high school kid who sort of came up late, in terms of being a day one kind of prospect. And then all of a sudden, he's in there and he's really like matured quickly, I think, in terms of his approach at the plate. There's still swing and miss there, but I think it's gotten better, and each year it's gotten better. And I think that's actually, like a sign of a really mature player. And the tools have always been, like on the high end for a lot of things. He's got speed, he's got power, he can throw and all that. So, I mean, I think they like him a lot. It's just, I don't know that they would rush him just given who's in front of him. Yeah,
I mean, like sometimes guys get to AA and it's just sort of they hit a wall, but for him to go back there, he's still young. I think he's still 21. For him to go back there and show meaningful improvement, like that's definitely meaningful to me. And for him to be a guy that is going to provide value with his glove, with his legs, like he doesn't need to be, kind of like we're talking about Denzel Clarke, like he doesn't need to be this, 350 OBP type of guy. He could be a 25 homer, 20 steal guy with a 300 OBP. Good start to the year for Bolte and Thomas. And I like that call that, potentially after the All-Star break and certainly after the trade deadline, Colby Thomas could get a shot. So Max Muncy has been like my favorite sort of A's sleeper for a while. He's not that much of a sleeper anymore since he's been red hot for about a week at the plate, but we also got Zack Gelof, who you mentioned, coming back. Do you think Muncy and Gelof are the favorites to start at third base and second base respectively next year? And then I guess I'll just start with that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think until we see Gelof back on the field, of course, it's a little hard to, but given even last year when he was down offensively, what he contributed defensively, and I think his position in that clubhouse in general would give him a strong, head start on being the everyday second baseman as soon as he does get back. Muncy, it's interesting. I mean, I think obviously he was a shortstop all the way through. He must be tired of Jacob Wilson since he had to not play shortstop because of Jacob, and now he's not playing it because of him in the major leagues. But so I think he's still learning third base, and I think you see that a little bit. But the arm strength was always fine from short, so there's no reason it wouldn't be good at third base. He's a good athlete, good instincts and stuff. So he could handle that. He was one that I don't think was necessarily like ready for the big leagues, but ended up having to be on that opening day roster because of the timing of Gelof's injury. Mm-hmm. So, he's sort of learning as he goes, but he did make a big step forward last year with his offensive approach. Again, cleaning up, some of the swing and miss that had been a real problem for him earlier on. But he's another guy that, if you don't care, like the on-base percentage is not going to be super sexy. The power, the speed, and the ability to hit for average are certainly there for him. And he's a very good athlete, so he can make a lot of adjustments. But it's just a matter of like, does the major leagues overwhelm him because he probably wasn't ready to be a major leaguer at the time? And at first it really looked like it was, but I think, now it looks like maybe having gone back down and come back up, he's taking some step forward. So, there isn't really an heir apparent to third base. I don't think Miguel Andujar is going to be their third baseman. The Geo, I mean, that was, I don't know. Anyway, but he like, so it's kind of wide open. And as I mentioned, like Tommy White's probably the only real strong. I mean, Brett Harris is still in the system. He's a really good defensive third baseman, but like, there's like Tommy White's probably the only actual like top end third base prospect that they currently have that you would project to be in the upper levels next year. So between him and Muncy, I would guess Muncy would certainly have the head start, at this point.
Yeah, and I guess what I meant by like when I said this has been a red hot week for Muncy, he's got 3 homers in the last 5 games, also 6 Ks. So he did strike out 3 times yesterday. So I mean, the strikeouts are obviously still a problem, but he's got power, and he's like we were talking about with Bolte, like he has shown the ability to improve. Going back to a level that he didn't have as much success at, he goes back the next time, he really handles it. And as you said, he didn't really belong on that opening day roster. This is kind of more at the stage of the season where he was probably ready to be up. You brought up Tommy White a few times. I always thought that he was sort of, stretched defensively at third base and might just be another one of these first base DH types for them. Are you thinking that he might be able to stick at third?
He made a lot of strides at LSU last year as a third baseman. The coaching staff there really raved about how much better he played there. And I think they've liked what they've seen so far from him there. His body type makes you not think that he looks like a guy who could play third base. But I think in thinking of the other Max Muncy, perhaps the A's have learned their lesson when it comes to like not necessarily, shoehorning someone because the body type doesn't quite fit what you are looking for. So, so far, I think, at this point, they are really looking at him as a third baseman and not to move over to first.
All right, Melissa. So we're going to fill out the A's opening day roster for 2026. I think I can put Shea Langoliers at catcher, right?
Yeah, I think unless, now that he's hurt and probably hurt close to the trade deadline, I don't see them trading him. So, yeah, I think he's probably the catcher still.
And Nick Kurtz at first base.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
And I guess we're going to say Zack Gelof at second base.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think Luis Urias is going to take that from him.
And then how about we do Max Muncy / Tommy White at third base?
Okay.
Is there anyone else going to throw in the mix there?
No, I mean, unless you think Andujar can play there, I don't think. Yeah, I think those are the guys.
And then if it is Tommy White, then do we think it's kind of Max Muncy as the super util, like? Because I mean, he would be able to play second, short, third.
I could see that. I mean, I also think White probably doesn't get there till midway through next year. If he's still in Lansing, he'll probably finish the year in Midland and then start the year in AAA. So,
and obviously Jacob Wilson at shortstop, and then do we want to put Tyler Soderstrom in left field?
I had written down I had like a 3-headed monster: Soderstrom, Andujar, and Thomas. And I don't know if that's but I think of that amalgam, there'll be somebody. I'm guessing Blade is not probably on this roster next year, just given how this is sort of shaking out. Especially if you have Clarke as your center fielder. Although they don't currently among this group have anyone else who could even remotely play center field as backup. So we'll have to figure. They'd have to cross that bridge, But
so like Denzel, Clarke. I mean, the defense. Should we just give him center field?
if I'm running the team, which they clearly have not put that power on.
They don't run everything by you?
Yeah, no, as many years as I made suggestions and they've been inclined to take them. But if I were running the team, yes, I do think you need to be strong defensively up the middle, especially, in today's game, where especially I think outfield defense had been so devalued for such a long time. And now that these guys can hit the ball hard, but we're into the outfield, it's not just being able to make the over the fence catches, but his ability to get balls in the gap is a huge advantage over what they have previously had before. And I think that makes the pitching, the lessening in the pitching pressure so much better. So I would put him there. If they don't get rid of Blade, then, obviously maybe it's Blade, Clarke, Soderstrom, and Butler are your outfielders, and you figure it out from that mix there. And then, Max Schumann's actually been a pretty decent utility guy too. So I think you probably wouldn't throw him out with the bathwater without kind of considering, and he can play a little bit of center field in a pinch if they needed him to.
And then obviously Lawrence Butler at right field, Brent Rooker at DH. That's funny you threw out that idea of trading Nick Kurtz for JJ Weatherholt to shore up third base. I'm trying to think of what type of moves they might make. It almost, I don't know, it almost seems like if they traded someone, it almost seems like it'd be Soderstrom.
I think it would be too, just given that, I think Kurtz's ceiling as a power hitter is higher than Soderstrom's as a power hitter. And it is overall getting on base and all that. Although I do think Soderstrom's ceiling is quite high. The tough part is I don't think you're going to get the high wave value unless Soderstrom goes off and gets to close to 40 home runs this year or something, which I suppose is possible. It's not likely, but possible. You're probably not going to get the value for what his ceiling is in a trade. And I think the concern is you trade him to someone and he's only 23 and 2 years from now he's hitting 35, 40 homers a year for somebody else. That would be a tough pill to swallow, but but it depends. It depends on what you're getting back in return. And again, if there's another team that's interested in being creative and sending, they're blocked, but I'm looking at Boston, right? Boston has 1,000 outfielders and some that actually can play pretty good defense. They're all blocked, blocking each other. Does Rafaela somehow become available and there's a deal there to be made and they could use a first baseman given that Cassis is not necessarily healthy ever. There are things that maybe could come up that would make it, but who knows? We haven't had a lot of good fun trades in baseball lately.
I think I think Soderstrom, he's 23, he's a free agent in 2030, and so I think he's entering his prime and he's cheap. So I think almost every team that doesn't have a clear first base, a clear DH would be interested to some extent because even the cheap teams would want him, right?
It's interesting. I think the question is when they go out to trade somebody who's having a good power year, how much do people say, well, it's because you're playing home games at Sutter Health? And even if that's not a thing, because I don't think his splits on at home or on the road are necessarily that egregiously different. But, you do wonder if it's that Coors Field effect where almost everybody looks at the guys that they're, offering up and being like, well, I don't know that I want to deal with that. But on the flip side, if it is a situation where you're dealing with GMs that are looking at that on a more legitimate, I could see it happening. Just don't trade with Atlanta if they're them. Although yeah. I think the Braves are pretty well set at first base for a while.
Yeah, they've got Ozuna and Olsen. They're probably not. But yeah, I mean that's interesting. So yeah, our opening day A's lineup: Langoliers at catcher, Kurtz at first base, Gelof at second base. Tentatively say Max Muncy at third base, Jacob Wilson shortstop, Soderstrom / maybe Colby Thomas if Soderstrom gets traded at left field, Denzel Clarke center, Lawrence Butler right field, Brent Rooker DH. Now I only have one pitcher question for you here. Who will be, and a follow-up, who will be the best starting pitcher for the A's in 2026?
Yeah.
Potential follow-up.
I think that's a tough, again, like I mentioned earlier, I don't think that like they can trade Luis Severino because he's making money and they need people on their roster that make money. And he's been an ace on the road and horrible at home. So that's like one of those weird things where the overall ERA is not going to reflect how actually good he's probably been. So, I think the easy answer is probably him. But I do, we were talking about they do for once actually have some starting pitching prospects. It's been several years that they hadn't had them. I think you've seen glimpses of Gunnar Hoglund and JT Ginn showing like some flashes of being good. And I think, they'll get more chances. Again, it's going to be hard to break guys in that ballpark, but like, right. I think those guys are intriguing. And then, you've got Luis Morales is now up to AAA and he's pitching really well there. And I think that's, that guy has not gotten a lot of hype outside of the A's organization, but they've been excited about him from the moment they signed him out of Cuba. And, he was a little bit banged up last year, but he's been, hit the ground running this year, and even pitching in Vegas hasn't really fazed him too much yet. So I think he's really good. Gage Jump got better when he got to AA, which is kind of amazing. I would imagine they kind of cap his innings at 110-ish or so, just given that he threw 83 last year coming off Tommy John. So like, you probably don't see him. I don't know that he gets to AAA this year, or if he does, it's just a couple starts at the end of the year. But like, I could see him getting into the rotation at some point, fairly soon. Mason Barrett's been a little bit up and down, but he's a guy they were very high on going into the year. So there's some pitching talent there now. And, like, frankly, the bullpen's such a disaster that if some of those guys can move into a bullpen role and be effective for them, that would be pretty helpful as well, I think. But it's good to see them actually producing on the pitching side again in the farm system, because it had been so hitter heavy for the last, 5 or 6 years.
Do you have a favorite out of Ginn or Hoglund?
I don't know. I mean, I think the stories for both of them, are really good. Like, I think you like to see these guys that, overcame injuries coming out of the draft, had to regain their stuff after Tommy John. It took a little longer, so people sort of forgot about them, but now the stuff is back. They both command the ball pretty well. I think what was weird was seeing them giving up home runs, because they've generally both been ground ball pitchers. So, if they can get back to that, I think both have a chance to be, decently successful.
Yeah, I thought Ginn maybe showed a bit higher of a ceiling, but it also, like, he hasn't been able to stay healthy, and so you don't know. Like, it seemed like the stuff got better, and then he just couldn't stay healthy. So it's, but then Luis Morales, I've always felt like he was getting, sort of more public or more scouting sort of love than he necessarily deserved until this year. I thought he was going to be maybe a reliever just due to the injuries, the sort of inefficient outings, inability to go deep into games. And then he was awesome at AA, and yeah, like he's at AAA now. It's going to be interesting to see how that goes for him. But you didn't mention Jack Perkins.
Yeah, I was going to say he's the other one. And I think he got a little forgotten at the beginning of the year because he started the year on the injured list. But since he's come back, he's been just as effective as he was at the end of last year. And I think, he's another guy who the walks have gone down as he's gotten a little bit deeper into the, minor leagues. I think they were kind of a problem for him a little bit at the middle of last year. And so, yeah, if he can fill up the strike zone, he's definitely got big league stuff for sure. And, I think at worst case, he's a guy that can give you some real value in the bullpen too. But I think he's a legitimate big league arm. So,
yeah, I mean, Jack Perkins, I know he's a little older, but I think he's got a decent excuse for that. But also 26.9 K- walk and a 107 whip in 7 starts in the PCL. Like that's big time.
He's been good. I mean, that team in general has been actually quite good. Just they sort of all click together. And I do think sometimes that builds on itself a little bit. But yeah, like I think, when you saw him in Lansing and you saw him at the start of his time in Midland, he looked like that guy. And then the command kind of got away from him in AA a little bit. And maybe it was the injury that he hadn't fully succumbed to yet or whatever. But I think now that you see him filling up the strike zone a lot more again, yeah, and again, it's ABS, right? So it's legitimately throwing strikes in that sense.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think for sure he should have been in my initial thing, but I think that the fact that they do have like 4 or 5 guys that you could look at as being potentially big league starters who, if they don't succeed as starters, could be legitimate relievers is like, light years from where they were 2 years ago when they were like, scraping the bottom of the barrel a little bit to find guys. So they're definitely better off. It's just a question of like, they, for so many years, could know how to exactly develop a pitching staff to fit that stadium that they were playing in, to know how you can kind of build a team. Pitching and defense was the way to go. And I think they've been a little flat-footed in trying to figure out how to make it work there. I don't blame them. I mean, it's a very weird and difficult situation, but it's tough because just even knowing how to project these guys as they're jumping from Las Vegas, which is the most ridiculous place to try to pitch, in AAA, outside of like Reno, maybe in Albuquerque, to, this situation, there's just no number generator yet that gives you a clear picture of what that's going to look like. So it's been a little bit of hit and miss and trying to figure it out. But they do have velocity now as a system, which they didn't have for so many years. So I think eventually, it'll sort itself into a better pitching staff. But for the moment, it's kind of taking its lumps.
Yeah, I think the velocity point's a big point because it's like now they're going to go into next year with, 9, 10 guys, AAA big leagues that are, have viable like big league rotation stuff. Some of them will end up in the bullpen, but it's not like you got like 6 or 7 guys that are all sitting like 92, 94, and you're trying to figure out which guys are going to be the starters, knowing that none of them really have a good fallback plan in the bullpen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like Morales is like the only guy who throws harder in the system than him is Mason Miller. Right. So, that's that, and to have that as a starter would be pretty impressive for them.
Okay. So, non-A's question to close. I'm excited for this one. So you're senior editor for The Athletic. I assume you're reading and learning interesting stuff about different players, different organizations all the time. So I want you to give me a big leaguer and a minor leaguer from any team who you think is either breaking out right now or could be poised to break out in the coming weeks.
Yeah. So the big leaguer one I thought was tough because, a lot of these guys a lot of people would be like, well, duh, these guys.
Yeah.
Like you think of even a Cal Raleigh, like I don't feel like people are fully appreciating just what an absolute monster this guy has become behind the plate. Like, and if he gets to 15 steals and he hits 60 homers, like, has anyone ever done that? Andy's a catcher. Like that's kind of crazy. I was thinking like Mackenzie Gore is another guy that I feel like people aren't paying as much attention to just how much of a leap forward he's taken over even what was a pretty good year last year for him at Washington. Like he's become ace level. Exactly the guy people thought they were going to get with San Diego. I think O'Neill Cruz is like starting to become the guy who's not just like the StatCast guy, but like an actual legitimate, well-rounded player too, who can produce numbers. So those were sort of the guys on the big league side, but I know that's not like super exciting because it's not like dynasty. But
I know I maybe set you up there to do that, but I mean Mackenzie Gore, like that return they got for Juan Soto.
That was a really great trade.
I mean, can you get a better return?
No, I mean, if you're going to trade Juan Soto, and I don't know that you should ever trade Juan Soto, but if you are going to trade Juan Soto, I'm not sure you could have gotten a better return than that. Yeah, even with like Hassel not necessarily living up to it, they still have like
just
more legitimate league
James. I think I might have put James Wood, C.J. Abrams, and Mackenzie Gore in the top 50 of my dynasty rankings.
Yeah, no, and that you build a team around those 3 guys, and you're doing just fine. And then you look at you still got Susanna. Like there's stuff there that they can still be off of, right? So they just got to figure out the other pieces. But I think Washington will be pretty good pretty soon. And then my minor league guy, I'm sure again because he plays for the Mets, people have been talking about it, but Jonah Tong has been a guy that I've been super excited about even from last year. Just like here's this guy that quiet Canadian player who people probably hadn't heard a lot about, and I think he was putting up numbers, and there was sort of this sense that maybe he was just sort of a touch and feel guy that was kind of fooling play. But from what I'm hearing, the stuff is legitimate. Hitters just don't know what to do with him. They don't see the ball well coming out of there at all. And so I think he might turn into one of baseball's best pitching prospects pretty soon.
Yeah, the hitters will tell you how good the stuff is, and the hitters are telling us that his stuff is very good.
Yes. Yeah. And he's done it now for, a year and a half, right? So it's not a flash in the pan kind of thing. He's
got 71 strikeouts over his last 41 innings.
Yeah. Yeah.
With a 1.10 ERA, 0.85 WHIP.
Yeah. And he's not like a guy who's just like throwing 105 and everybody's falling over, that kind of thing. Like he's spotting his stuff, but he does have legitimate stuff too. So it's not a deception only kind of thing. So he was sort of my pick to click. If you're gonna
I love it. Melissa Lockard, do you got anything you want to promote or tell us about?
Well, just we're, at The Athletic, we're head deep into draft season. We've got a mock draft coming on tomorrow from Keith Law that is going to be great. And we got more top 100 lists for that coming out. We just put out a top 60 kind of revised top prospect list from him earlier this month. Or maybe it was the end of May. I can't forget my months anyway. It was very recently. So definitely recommend you guys check all that stuff out.
That's awesome. The great Melissa Lockard of The Athletic. Thank you for joining me, Melissa. I'll be back with another episode next week.